Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the committee program with myself, Arun Chaudhary. This is our sophomore attempt at the Smart Club section of the program, where we do a very deep dive with a panel of smart people on one issue. And today we're going to be talking about what has been called the pink wave, but we're putting a big question mark at the end because it does not seem to be a thing that's manifesting, and actually is just an invitation, I think, to us and to you, with the help of our guests, to actually have a more idiosyncratic view of what's happening. But let me actually read my prepared remarks. Latin America looms large in the United States political imagination as a landscape for cartoonish political extremes. Bearded Marxist guerrillas, sunglassed fascists, coups, tanks, and rarely any subtlety. From all sides, analysis can be told in very broad strokes, often to make the point the teller hopes to score. At the turn of the century, the emerging governments of Argentina, Venezuela, and Brazil were all on the path to rejecting neoliberalism, forming what was called the pink tide in the popular imagination of the left. And although this may have had mixed results, that is the basis for this pink wave that was predicted to start with the elections of the left-leaning governments in Ecuador. But as we will discuss, the surprising results there, as well as elsewhere, might point towards the need to take a more holistic look at an idiosyncratic and not too easily generalized part of the world. With us to give a fuller roundup of recent events in Latin America are Alejandra Bernito, historian at Maine National University of San Marcos, editor and political activist; Silvia Colombo, Latin American correspondent for Fola de Sao Paulo; and Samuel Mazzolini, research fellow in political science at the University of Calabria in Italy. Samuele, let me start with you. So listen, we had this elections in Ecuador, and Moreno of the PACE Alliance, who is the successor to Correa, who is the sitting president, was expected to win, was ahead by 10 points, and then somehow in the second round, the person who we refer to as the banker, from the Creating Opportunity Party, Guillermo Lasso, has slipped up the middle and is now the president-elect of Ecuador. So what happened?
Right, yeah. Well, thanks for having me in your program, first of all. Hi, everybody. So yes, this neoliberal conservative banker, Guillermo Lasso, won in the runoff of the presidential elections of Ecuador just a few weeks back. And he defeated the heir apparent designated by Rafael Correa, whose name is Andrés Arauz, who is a young progressive technocrat, who, as you say, was leading the race after the first round. And, the result in itself is quite stunning. Arauz was, he had almost 33% of the vote after the first round, and Lasso almost 20%. So, he was quite ahead. And Lasso managed to make an incredible leap forward to 52%. Why was that? We need to wonder on the motives behind it. I think the main reason for the outcome is that in Ecuador, you got this widespread opposition to the figure of Correa. Correa elicits a big opposition in the country at large, even within the left. Think about this. In the first round, we had other two leftist candidates. The Indigenous candidate, Yaku Perez, and Hervas, who was a social democrat. Yaku Perez urged his supporters to spoil ballots, and it was a massively successful call. If you look at some parts of the Andean region, actually pretty much the whole Andean sector of Ecuador, the spoiled ballots actually exceed the actual votes for Arauz. And the other candidate, the social democratic candidate, he announced that he will vote for Guillermo Lasso outright. So the three leftist candidates in the first round summed more than 60%. But since they were totally divided in the name of rejection of Correa, you get this result in the runoff. Rafael Correa is this highly divisive figure. He ruled the country from 2007 till 2017. Many progressive social reforms that can be praised in the first few years, but then, especially starting from 2013, his rule, starts to be characterized by an increasingly authoritarian drift. So he's got this very narcissistic personality, which led him in the last few years in power to attack pretty much anybody, even remotely questioning his politics, even social activists. There have been dozens of social activists jailed for protesting against his politics. So Arauz was in this very awkward position in the election, in the campaign. On the one hand, in order to have a stable platform of votes, he needed to be identified as a loyal successor of Correa, after the tragic change of mind of current President Lenin Moreno. But on the other, he needed to expand the electoral base by taking a distance from his mentor, and he tried to do it. He came out with a few statements, in which he sort of said, "Oh yes, there was some persecution. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to do that. There have been some mistakes in the past." But in the end, he was kind of caught within this ambivalence, and eventually he was overwhelmed by it.
I mean, I have to say, I'm sympathetic to that as a problem. Generally, when you are trying to inhabit a semi, like it's Al Gore with Bill Clinton, it's lots of mainstream politicians you can think of who want to sort of embrace the legacy of their predecessor, but not entirely embrace it. Alejandro, I'd love to move to Peru because we're talking about successors and things like this. We have a very interesting case. And look, Peru is so exciting right now because it is what seems like to us a battle royale of ideology. You have Pedro Castillo, who is a Marxist, and then you have Keiko Fujimori, who is the daughter of Alberto, the strong man of Peru during the 90s. People my age, of course, remember him as the sort of, the perennial counterforce to the Shining Path when this was happening. Is there more to this than this sort of WWF wrestling super ideological fun match? What else is going on?
Yes, as we know, Fujimori family is like a dynasty. Alberto Fujimori was president for 10 years in Peru, and he planned a system of bribery for staying in power for 30 years. And he raised her daughter, Keiko Fujimori, for be the next president, and now she's getting the legacy as far as he can. But Pedro Castillo, Marxist, yes, he got 90% of the votations. And Castillo said, very convinced, these words the first day that we knew that he won the first round. They said that only political scientists can rule the country. They had several years to do it. And what have they done for this country? In the biggest cities, they only see as far as the end of their noses. And now it's time for the people, the real people, not their torturers. As we know, Alberto Fujimori is in prison now, is in jail for several crimes against human rights. And Keiko Fujimori, she's charged with money laundering for being associated with drug trafficking. And she's always saying that in the 90s, with her father, we had a better country, and we need to return to these times. So I think that maybe even political scientists and journalists and lawyers at every election says that the leftist candidates are violent. And as with the Bernie Bros phenomenon, they say that leftist supporters are violent too. What we see now is how much far-right politicians wanted to militarize the cities. They were very violent in last November. They committed or tolerated crimes against human rights. And now we can see that how this is not as they told us. They always say that the system always worked, but if we can visit any city that is not Lima or even in Lima, but in the periphery, you will see how poverty is always increasing. So now with pandemic, it's worse.
And do you see, just to follow up real quick, the kind of, for the electorate, is it another case of maybe the electorate sort of getting angry about a failed right-wing response to COVID? Or does this security issue, and is that why Keiko keeps hitting it so hard, still resonating with people? Like, where are the swing voters at?
Yes, well, Keiko Fujimori doesn't seem very worried about COVID-19 or anything because as we can see in far-right politicians, she said no more lockdowns, what we need is to work. And if a family lost any one of his members because of the COVID-19, we will give them $3,000. That has no sense, but sometimes people can think that maybe we can work, and I'm more afraid of the poverty than the virus. Pedro Castillo, he's very new in this kind of scenario because he was always with the workers. but he never said that he wanted to be president. So now he's trying to create a strategy for control the pandemic, but it is not so good. So there's a lot of fear because we don't know what we will do. In our case, the vaccination is very slow, and we had a big scandal here called Vacuna Gate, Vaccine Gate, and the former president Martin Vizcarra got a vaccine before anyone, before any deal with Sinopharm. So and he did it with a lot of politicians that were near from him. But we are waiting now for what they will say, because there's a lot of people like Mario Vargas Llosa, some political and cultural figures that are saying that it's better Keiko Fujimori because she will defend, she will be always in the right side, and the right side is the far right, because they will be taking care of the economy. But we see in the past 5 years maybe that how leftists, not just Pedro Castillo, but other leftists, were building a new speech about how the workers are the center of the country and not just the political scientists and the people who rule the country as many years, for many years.
Yeah. So when dealing with leftists, certainly Peru and other places, they look towards Colombia to get ideas and to get kind of tactics. Sylvia, can you tell us, it's less of a people-centered thing, and it's more of a people-centered thing and less of a politician-centered thing. But in Colombia, we have a very unpopular tax law, which would put an undue burden on working people and middle-class families, leading to widespread protests. We see a lot of stuff going on in Cali. Even though they've now rescinded that law, the protests are still going. What's going on there? And I would love for you to contrast, especially with Colombia's much different history with how they have dealt with popular movements, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. What Colombia is living these days is kind of a follow-up of what happened in 2019, when many people went out in the streets to ask for better access to health, education, and also to defend the peace process that was signed by the previous government, Juan Manuel Santos, and the FARC, the guerrillas, which has been in a war with the government for more than 50 years. What we have in Colombia right now is kind of the follow-up of this movements that started in 2019, and that also happened in other countries in South America, like Ecuador, like Chile, each one with some particularities, but more or less it was the same demand for more presence of the state in the social in the social being in their lives, you know. And what we had in these few last years in many countries of South America, like Chile, like Ecuador, like Colombia, are some governments who are imposing some austerity measures, because there is not that many money that existed during the golden years, or the first pink tide, if you want to call it. So Colombia is making some adjustments, and this tax reform was part of it. But what happens there now is that the president is pretty much unpopular. He couldn't implement the main issues of the peace process. And with the pandemics, all the social inequality and the economic problems of Colombia, they are more serious right now. They are more aggressive right now than before. And also they have a very violent police. The police in Colombia is controlled by the military. and they are pretty much aggressive. They don't have many patience with protests. So at first, last week, they were making this protest because of the tax reform, but the protest went so heavy, they killed 19 people, as far as we know, and they disappeared with more than 80 people. And right now, the protests are not only because of the tax reform, but also because of the violence of the state. So they are like scaling.
That's important to understand. Like people are responding to violence with violence, and that is causing, that's the fuel that's keeping this moving.
Yes. Yeah, and it's nationwide. Yeah, it started with some cities, some of the main cities like Bogota, Cali, Barranquilla, Medellin, and now it's kind of everywhere. And it's a mix of protest against the tax reform and protest because of the violence of the state.
I'm going to throw this to Samuele, but everyone should feel free to jump in on top or whatever. But when we look at a place like, and I'm going to say the B word now, Bolivia, the important addition becomes just on the surface. Of course, below, it's always there, but the United States. International pressure from industrialized nations. How do you see, is that what Bolivia can be a good example for us of, is what happens when that gets more overt? Or I think everyone here knows the broad strokes of what happened. Morales has policies that we don't particularly like, that aren't necessarily business friendly, and then all of a sudden there's problems in an election that doesn't seem that many problems with, and then this new person. We've seen this movie before, but how did it play out, and how does that affect the conversation we're having?
Yeah, I mean, the United States they're always there. They're always just behind the corner looking at what happens in Latin America, always ready to intervene. Latin America is no longer a top priority for U.S. foreign policy. It hasn't been for the last maybe 20, 25 years. But still, when things get a little, too out of the way, they still, they got a number of ways to intervene and to influence. They got their diplomacy, but it's financial diplomacy is also pretty effective. The IMF and the World Bank and so on and so forth. But also in the case of Bolivia, we had the Organization of the American States, led by Uruguayan Almagro, who played a key role in the coup/insurrection that took place 2 years ago when the results of the elections was invalidated, and the military stepped in and kind of suggested to Morales that it was better for him to go. And then the government of Janine Áñez ensued. Of course, you got an economic war taking place in Venezuela. Massive boycott, kind of embargo similar to that Cuba has been experiencing for decades. Of course, the situation in Venezuela, the problems there, are exogenous but also endogenous. It's got a lot to do with the what the regime of Maduro has been doing for the last 8 years or so. But I mean, it's always a presence to keep an eye on. I don't know if the others want to say something more about it. What do you think?
Yeah, because maybe it plays into the internal politics, not just the external pressures.
Well, you got the. Of course, I mean, I think the United States played a pretty. Of course, it was covered, but they played a key role in assisting the lawfare that has been waged in different countries in the last few years, through which former presidents have been accused of corruption or wrongdoing. Even though, I mean, the judiciary, the legal basis for accusing them were really tenuous. Were really little. There's a case of Lula, of course, who's just been freed of any charge. There's a case of Rafael Correa, who is in exile in Belgium. He cannot set foot in Ecuador. And his former vice president, Jorge Glass, is in prison. You had that in Argentina as well. They tried to accuse Cristina Kirchner. And of course, I think the U.S. have collaborated in this attempt to, have these former leaders behind bars, to discredit them. And the media, the local media, also played a key role in sort of orchestrating a campaign, through which the the electorate was sold on the idea that who had governed their countries in the past few years were just corrupt buffoons who needed to be jailed right away. And I think that of course corruption, it has been there even during the progressive governments. I mean, it doesn't mean that they were totally exempt of it. It's something endemic. It's something that it's got to do with the culture, with the mentality that takes much longer to extirpate. But I think, of course, the cases of corruption were grossly exaggerated in order to attack those key figures that led those popular progressive processes.
I would even say more than that. Corruption becomes so narrowly defined that it's only the theft of public funds, and it doesn't become all of the other things that are about state capture and corruption, etc. And speaking of all of that, and I'm just going to loop around to Sylvia on this. Do you think that America sort of not being as aggressive as prosecuting the war on drugs has changed sort of our interests in places like Colombia and our interest in their elections altogether? It used to be something that was of the utmost importance. Who the Colombian defense minister was, as anyone every American with Netflix knows, will make a whole season of a television show for you. So unpack that for us.
Yeah, I think I agree with Samuel with the idea that the U.S. is not that interested in Latin America like it was in the Cold War days or in the days they were financing the armies against the guerrillas in Central America, for example, or financing and helping coup d'etat like the one we had in Chile in 1973. And right now it's much more subtle. I'm not sure they are involved with the with so-called lawfare cases. I don't think we have enough evidence to say that they were behind these corruption investigations that started. Many of them happened in Brazil with the Lava Jato and Odebrecht scandal. I don't know if they are involved in that. I don't have any evidence. But yes, they are involved in pretty much in what happened in Colombia in the last 20 years, when we see things like the Plan Colombia, which was a huge amount of money that was given to Colombian government in order to face the cartels, the drug traffickers, and not all of this money went to this fight. So nowadays, I mean, since Obama was the one who changed a bit this way of seeing Colombia and seeing the war on drugs. So he supported the peace process that Juan Manuel Santos was negotiating with the FARC, with the guerrilla. Since then, I think it changed a lot, the relationship between Colombia and the United States. Even though in the middle of the way, when we had the Trump administration in Washington, he was not very supportive of this peace treaty, and he was like trying to go back to Plan Colombia ways of dealing with the cartels. But right now, I think that it changed. And the peace process will be in the priorities of America. I don't know if it is between the priorities of Ivan Duque, the now president, but also he's not going to be the president for long. I guess no, because we have elections next year, and it's pretty much difficult that he can make a successor.
Alejandra, I think a very good parallel that I'd like to draw with us, especially talking about Bolivia and Peru, is the prevalence of the indigenous struggle inside and probably outside of these movements. And so when you have someone like Pedro Castillo, who may be extremely left economically and then sort of squishy when it comes to civic policies and when it comes to human rights, where does that fall down with the Peruvian indigenous, who we know formed a very strong core in a lot of the rebellions and insurrection movements in the past?
Yes, he got the support, first of all, from Evo Morales. We are very, very related, yes, with Bolivia. And here always the far right will say that Bolivia is a bad example of progress because they're a country full of nationalism and as we know, nationalism, it can be always a conservative or far-right politician or politic way of see the politics. But now in the case of Pedro Castillo, he's trying to respond these kind of attacks from far-right politicians with powerful messages. Even he's very xenophobic with Venezuelans. But, for example, in the last weeks, we had some billboards, big billboards in Lima that had messages like communism creates misery and poverty, or do you know casting a blank ballot helps communism, or earning more through my effort is being free. But as we see, indigenous movements always said that they tried to live in peace, but they were always killed by different big enterprises. And now they are trying to make these movements go through Pedro Castillo, who answered, for example, with a poem by Eduardo Galeano that said, "We are the nobodies, the children of nobody, the master of nothing, the nobodies who are worth less than the bullets that kill them." So it's very complex because all the politics in Peru are ruled in Lima. And in Lima, we never feel really what is happening in the other cities or in the rest of the territory. But I think that this era and the pandemic helped that a lot of people could use digital resources or social media to explain what they are trying to make from their cities and how they need to be listened. We listen always, journalists explaining that, yes, in other cities, indigenous people need to be heard, but now it's time. They are trying to say in it very clear. Now we want to be listened. You don't need to tell me that I'm not listened by anyone. I want to have a voice, and my voice is represented in this ballot that say that Pedro Castillo needs to be the next president.
So, we started out saying we didn't want to make broad generalizations, but it's now the part of the show where I really want to do that. So, something that Alejandro said just popped into my head, which is sort of maybe the hope is that social media, digital campaigning kind of would take things in a different direction. And what I think that different direction is as a campaigner is sort of the retooling of mass politics, which at least on the center left, and especially where I am now in Europe, you can see this just so easily when you go country by country, is that every center-left party is essentially become a professional party and not a mass leadership party, and has trouble getting people because that sense of community has faltered. It's not just even about the politics. Is what people wanted to see in a new pink tide, they were calling the pink wave, it is, I think, this community, or the sense that there is a new mass movement. So my broad question is, who is representing, who is on the cusp of creating a new mass party? Is that happening in any of the places that we're talking about? Are the politics changing to sort of be more popular, as in working with the people, not as in, 90% approval rating? And what is the motion we see, in terms of the way the parties work, the way these center-left and left-wing parties are working?
I would somehow avoid broad generalization. I think it's difficult to relate what's happening in one country to the continent as a whole. I mean, we don't really have a homogeneous trend. We got more of a fragmented picture, really. So in Argentina and Bolivia, we got progressive governments, that are back in power, but they're more modern than their predecessors. Venezuela is it's a case apart. In Peru, as we were just saying, you got a socialist Stalinist who seems to be on the brink of becoming the next president. In Uruguay, the center-right is back in power after long parentheses of center-left governments in Chile. God knows what's going to happen, with the Constituent Assembly elections in a few weeks. Well, having said that, I think that one of the deficits of the first pink tide, of the years 2000, let's say, is that they came out, out of these, social street protests that had been taking place in the, 90s and early 2000s in different countries. So you had this social effervescence, and then you had a sort of vertical move, some movements, some parties trying to take advantage in a positive sense of the energy in order to, gain state power. But then when they became governments, and I mean, that's clearly the case in Ecuador, but also to an extent in Bolivia, of course, Brazil, this government somehow forgot about their origins, forgot about the social movements that created the very conditions that permitted them to reach power. So they somehow, just disregarded the horizontal axis of politics, just to use this academic jargon, which I think, though, it's pretty effective. It sort of hammers in the point. They forgot they totally disregarded, their demands. And they started to govern without listening to them anymore, without taking into account demands emerging from the population. And so now I think we are, depending on the country really, but I think in different places we are going to a situation in which we are having social effervescence again. Maybe creating the conditions for new leftist governments to take power in a few years. Hopefully, they will not forget about the social movements that pushed them to government. Let's look at what happened in Ecuador in October 2019. Look at what happened in Ecuador. The movement, the social protests didn't lead to a new leftist government, unfortunately. Look at what is happening in Colombia, what has been happening in Chile. I'm not so sure about the Brazilian case, really. Maybe Silvia knows a bit more about it. But I think this, the new way of organizing. Just coming back to your original question, the new way of understanding politics of these parties. I think they should heed the social movements a bit more and try to have the popular element. I think they become a little bit too technocratic, a little bit too detached from the real needs and sentiments of the population. And I think if you want a leftist party to govern in strict accordance to what is going on below the surface, you need to maintain this connection more, stronger, more stable, more durable.
To listen and to harness anger, right? This is what a mass party has to do. It's so hard. Sylvia, do you have any reaction to that vis-a-vis things that are happening in Brazil, or even I think make a case for Argentina, kind of? Sorry, go ahead.
I think I agree with Samuel with the idea that we cannot generalize, and particularly right now where things are so pretty much disconnected in Latin America. We can see a wave, and what we used to call the pink tide or the red wave, or in the 2000s, was pretty much connected with the good economic moment that Latin America was living, and that allowed these leaders, these different leaders, these leftist leaders, to give money to the people in simple words, through assistentialist programs and through other benefits. This money is gone. We don't have this boom of commodities as in that time. So I don't think we can have like the same phenomena happening in the whole Latin America. What worries me about this pretty much popular leaders that are in Latin America today is that they are actually right-wing leaders, just like Bolsonaro, just like Nayib Bukele.
This is the subtext of my question. Yeah.
Nayib Bukele in El Salvador that just did something incredibly authoritarian, like a coup d'etat, actually, by throwing all the judges from the Supreme Court. So maybe what we are going to see in the next few months or years is a lot of social uprising and tensions related to the problems that became deeper and more profound in Latin America. And the answer to that, I don't know if it's going to be like the searching of a lot of leftist leaders. I don't see them actually. We saw some new left coming out from Ecuador with with Yacu Perez, for example. I think it was an alternative of something new. I don't know if it was for something good, but something new, like new kind of leadership. But I don't see it. In Brazil, the solution to fight Bolsonaro now is Lula, but it's almost 80 years old.
Right.
It's an old solution. So I don't see like a left wave coming back.
Anytime.
Yeah, I think we should be more worried with other things, with democracy, with the stabilization of our democracy, and don't let leaders like Bolsonaro, Nayib Bukele, Nicolas Maduro, Daniel Ortega just go through our democratic system. We should be worried about that more than if we would have a good leftist leader.
Right. It sort of feels better than it gets the results. Last question goes to Alejandra. Vis-a-vis what we're talking about here, and I think Sylvia's point about the surplus got spent and it ain't coming back is so important. What is it that brings structural change to a place like Peru? Is it, I mean, like, are folks, progressives, leftists barking up the right tree? Are they on the right path when they're looking for a political solution? Or is there deeper cultural, institutional, just what is it going to take? This election that's happening right now, as interesting as it is probably not the long-term solution for what is a peaceful and prosperous Peru.
Very difficult to say what we need now, because I agree totally with Samuel and Sylvia, because even in my country, different leftist movements say that they have priorities to solve, but some movements say that the priority is gay marriage and legalized abortions. And other movements or parties will say that labor rights are the center of what we need to change now. But if we can see and research our history, in the 60s and 70s in Peru, we had a very similar scenario, and what it led was to an authoritarian government, and then the shining path actions that we all know now what happened. And maybe now what we want is don't go to this kind of history or future. If we repeat what happened in 60s and 70s, it will be maybe a lesson that we never learned what we needed. And now what we always hear from the far right is we need to learn from our history. The history says that leftists are radicalized always like the shining path. What we are trying to do is not go too extremely, trying to listen and talk later and propose solutions. Yes, the first solutions are near or involve indigenous rights and culture protection. Obviously, labor rights, but maybe not some other topics that other movements in Latin America will do or will take as the most important or the center of their causes.
That's interesting. And so I think you're saying that you can also see the real danger in allowing the right to run to the left is essentially, to boil down, I think what you're saying. And I think we see that everywhere. And that's a danger when I turn on my television set in America and I see Tucker Carlson, going right from hating on immigrants to wondering why Google doesn't pay taxes, and seeing that it does seem like in a pandemic, the right wing has been good in adapting to a social democratic message. I think it's very dangerous. But thank all of you for coming on so much. I think we learned a lot. I think there's more to dig into. I would like to reach out to all of you, so we can dig in deeper on your respective expertise. And everyone else, thanks so much for watching this segment. And next week, I think Smart Club is going to be about self-determination, nationalism, and national liberation. Sticky terms that get thrown around like crazy. And we'll have someone in from Kosovo, from Catalan, and from Scotland to talk about it. Thanks so much.